As we continue here using this forum, right, to inspire intellectual innovation. And we have been doing this for the past 3 weeks. So don't be shy, engage, feel free to share your comments, share your perspectives, especially as this week we will be speaking a lot about our experiences, unpacking as we conduct using a real life example, a chain analysis, and a missing link analysis, which will take the format of more so my real life experience with my cancer journey. And let me tell you guys something. Last week we spoke about the importance of self discovery. And just like self discovery, the chain and missing link analysis is very important. And so you must conduct this analysis very early on as you traverse the road less traveled or as you set out to grow and transform, right? Because there will be bumps in the road. And sometimes those very bumps in the road can be aligned to something that occurred probably in some experience in your life or maybe your childhood. Some of those deep rooted behavioral patterns or things that show up in your life now are sometimes aligned to those very things that may have occurred that are allowing you to show up in that way, and especially something that occurred in your childhood. But perhaps, you know what, it has become a pattern, or that thing has become a pattern that you have grown accustomed to. And to date, you can't pinpoint what exactly it is and why those patterns or this particular behavior is consistently showing up. And that is worth addressing because this can affect your life, your dreams, your visions, and your goals. And today I'm going to share with you this pattern that continued to show up in my life and how I was able to make that link, how I was able to conduct that analysis. And looking at the chain analysis, we will identify, right, where this behavior all stems from. We will identify or unpack why this certain thing was happening to me and why I continued to show up in that particular way, right? That pattern was me always feeling the need to remove myself, right? Or always seeing it fit to hide in the background. And if some of you guys know me, you would have known that this is exactly Janita. This is how she was showing up in the world until she decided to use that vulnerability as a strength. And yes, I didn't just wake up one day and realize this. As I conducted my chain and missing link analysis, I did have to go to therapy and I did have to do the work. So being able to analyze and unpack is really being able to put in the work and to dissect and to analyze and to discover. Right? Without that sense of self-discovery and that sense of knowingness, like we spoke about in the starter pack, there are some things in your life that you might not be able to become one with. And that is why conducting that analysis and having that sense of knowingness is very important, especially early on in your life, because it will determine, right, not only how you show up for self, which would impact your growth and sense of transformation and development, but also how you show up for others. And I know we're speaking a lot here about the chain analysis and the missing link analysis, but what exactly is a chain analysis? So a chain analysis is a tool or technique that can allow you to pinpoint or describe first the prompting event, the chain of events due to the prompting event, the presenting event that puts you in a vulnerable spot, and the consequences of being in that vulnerable spot. So this is what your chain analysis will allow you to unpack. And you can take this exercise here and decide, you know what, I'm going to focus on this prompting event and I'm going to unpack today. So I want you to do this exercise with us today. So first, we're looking at the chain analysis. We know what the chain analysis is now. It's a prompting event. We're looking at the chain of events due to the prompting event, the presenting event that puts you in a vulnerable spot, and vulnerability is important. It gives you that sense of knowingness. When you have that sense of knowingness, there's a sense of power, clarity. Yeah. And it allows you to walk with authority and show up with a powerhouse presence, right? So I want you to be vulnerable in this moment. So this is our chain analysis. So what is the missing link then? The missing link is that missing thing. It is a tool that allows you to identify what got in the way. Maybe I wasn't paying attention and there was just something happening in the background. Yeah, and I just can't put my finger on it. And it is being able to, in that moment, when you identify what your missing link is or what got in the way, developing a coping technique or techniques as you are human. And as you embark on that journey, there will be building blocks and areas that might replay themselves in the back of your mind or in the future. So you would need to be equipped with the right tools. How do I cope? If this happens again, what am I going to do? How am I going to respond? Right? So this is why we're doing this exercise here today. And again, we're going to use a personal example. And I hope that with me, you will be able to do this exercise as we also highlight our coping techniques as we identify where this, what the prompting event was or is for us. Because I know some of us are still getting through that stage, right? So let's get it started. We're looking at the chain analysis, right? So what is the prompting event for me? The prompting event is my diagnosis with ALL. You know, when people ask me, who is Janita Pascal? So I say, I am Janita Pascal and I survived it all. And ALL is acute lymphocytic leukemia. That was at the age of 3. So that was the prompting event, cancer. What were the chain of events due to the prompting event? It was hair loss. And because I began to lose my hair, I was bullied at school. It's always good to define your why. This is the chain of events. And why is that? Why was that a chain of an event due to the prompting event for you? So because I was diagnosed with cancer, again, with cancer comes hair loss. And what happened then? I was bullied at school. You know, kids, again, my age, they were not familiar with what was happening. You know, so they made a joke out of it. What also happened was that my family had to neglect a lot of what they were doing to rally around me 24/7. So that was something else that happened. And then the third thing, I'm going to give you 3 examples here today, is that I was pulled away from the school environment and confined to a hospital bed for 6 months. So because I had cancer, I experienced hair loss, which also prompted bullying. My family, it impacted my family, so they had to neglect their duties. I was pulled away from school and was confined to a hospital bed for 6 months. So that prompting event and the chain of events aligned to the prompting event put me in a very vulnerable spot. And looking back at my journey, it was not until adulthood that I realized how vulnerable I had become because of my childhood cancer journey. So the presenting event that put me in that vulnerable spot is the prompting event and all the chain of events that came with it. Yeah? And I gave 3 examples above. So being bullied, not having a childhood like everybody else, and always having to look at my childhood journey and think of, you know, looking back at someone else who I see, and, you know, they speak about playing Chinese keep and all these wonderful things. And I'm like, okay, really? What happened? What happened there with me? Because that was not my story. And that played on my self-esteem and my thoughts a lot before having to break this down and really become vulnerable and own my story. And we're going to speak a lot about ownership in the next series of videos, right? Um, but that played a lot on my self esteem. And again, looking back at the third event, being pulled away from school, that impacted me in adulthood as voluntarily. I didn't notice I was doing it unless I was able to, until, sorry, I was able to unpack. And in adulthood, I realized that I was voluntarily pulling away from spaces, as again, this experience allowed me to feel like I would never fit in. Every time I would find myself in an environment of amazing people, I would say, you know what, everyone around you is healthy. And what if you're showing up, especially when I became the country coordinator for a program here? And I said, everybody's around you is healthy. You're coordinating, but what if one day you take ill and you just can't show up again? What if there is the probability, well, there is a probability of remission, spinal bifida. Recently, I conducted a nerve conduction test, and there are other factors that come with it. And I'm like, but you're not as healthy. So maybe you should just sit in the background and be okay with it and just pull yourself away. So those prompting events put me in that vulnerable place where I didn't feel like I had a place. I feel like my place was in the back, just hide behind everybody. And the consequences of being in that vulnerable spot was that, again, going back to my country coordinator position, even when I was presented with that opportunity to sit at many tables, I continued to hold myself back. And I know that some of you are identifying with this today, and that's why I asked for us to complete this exercise together. It might not be the cancer ALL journey, but I know that's something you're reflecting and then you're unpacking now, and you realize that something in your life allowed you to feel vulnerable. That sense of vulnerability had some consequences in your life, which might be affecting you now. So for me, I shied away from the spotlight. I was almost ashamed of my story and wondered, what if people knew? How would they receive it? And would they still be willing to know or to engage me, knowing that I'm healed and healing? And there are chances for other illnesses to present itself. So we're speaking here about the chain analysis, and you'll see we're unpacking so many things just in the chain analysis. Yeah? So now we're moving on to the missing link. What got in my way creating all of these consequences for me, What got in the way is me not being, is myself. And I tell that to a lot of people, and it's like, oh, you're so open and honest about it. Sometimes we get in our way. This was my story, and I was not owning it. How many of you are maybe afraid, scared, ashamed of your story, and you just don't want to own it? Or maybe that's just something you don't want to be identified with? Yeah, that was me once upon a time. I didn't want to own my story. And me not being present and accepting that this is my story and this is who I am. I didn't want to tell it out loud. I didn't want to say it out loud. And in the process, those limiting thoughts shaped my mindset. And that toxic behavioral pattern of not being able to own and accept who I am and what my story was, it prevented me from showing up with a powerhouse presence, even when the spotlight was shining right upon me. So you see how sometimes identifying that missing link can allow you to unpack so much. Conducting that chain analysis and saying, you know what, this is what was happening to me. This is why it was happening to me. Those were the consequences, and this is what I need to change. So what I needed to change was to develop a coping technique. And for me, I said, you know what? I'm going to affirm every day. And I'm going to tell myself, I am human. I survived it all. And that's my superpower. What's your superpower? I engaged in positive self talk. Mediation. Again, I went into therapy with my counselor, and we met every week. He gave me some exercises. I did the exercises. I emerged on the other side as a victor and not a victim. I was no longer a victim. I freed myself. To this day, I still engage in breathing techniques, deep breathing techniques. I use them and I integrate them into my everyday life. I learn when to pull away. I know that every Sunday I would need to take at least 2 hours to reflect on what was happening in my week again, chain analysis, missing link analysis, unpack, identify. Yeah. And I want to ask you, just like me, you might not be able to take 2 hours because that's spending a lot of time with yourself. And sometimes you feel like everybody's not the same. So I like spending a lot of time with myself and unpacking and reflecting and just reconnecting with myself every week. Because sometimes you can get so busy and so caught up in day-to-day life that you forget who you are and you're no longer connecting with yourself. You know who you are. You know you are Janita Pascal. You know you are Samantha. You know you are Tekla. But you're not connected to who you are. And when there is a sense of knowingness, when there is a sense of clarity, you will be able to take your power back, walking with authenticity and authority. I want you to sit in this for a moment. I want you to take this all in. I want you to tell yourself that you are human. Tell yourself that you are enough. Tell yourself that today you are taking your power back to walk with clarity and authority as you step into a powerhouse presence. Own your story, own who you are. Ensure that you conduct this chain and missing link analysis. And as often as you can, I ask you to take the time out. If you see that something is presenting itself in your life, try to understand, where is this thing coming from? Why am I feeling this way? How do I deal with this? Can this show up again? Yes. So how am I going to deal with this after today? Will I continue to crumble and allow this to suck every energy or every inch of energy out of me? Or do I want to connect with what is happening to me and how I am showing up in life because of this thing, to ensure that I show up as a person who has a sense of clarity, as that person who is going to take ownership and accept. Guys, I'm so happy. I know that this week the topic was a little deeper than expected. And sometimes we need to have those types of conversations. So I'm just very pleased that you were able to join us here today. And hopefully next week we can make this a lighter conversation, still with some meaning and thought-provoking, right? That can allow you to think, reflect, and show up as a better person tomorrow. Again, thank you for joining us here today. Happy Monday. Have a happy work week, school week, whatever you're doing this week. I want you to enjoy your week, take ownership, walk with authority, and show up with a powerhouse presence. Thank you so much for joining us here today.